Good evening and welcome to another in our series of webinars regarding energy in New York and how we can solve our energy problems without jeopardizing the health, safety, and economic security of the people in this state. I'm Doug Wood, the Associate Director of Grassroots Environmental Education. We're a nonprofit organization with no financial ties to any company engaged in power solutions. And it is our pleasure to host these forums and push back against some of the misinformation which is circulating around Albany with regards to our actual power needs now and in the future, and the currently available technologies that can help us meet our climate goals without breaking the bank. So, in the previous four webinars, we've talked about the costs associated with nuclear energy facilities, the new scientific information we have on health effects of living nearby them, the long lead time that's required for construction, the history of nuclear power accidents and debacles, the risk that nuclear power plants pose for terrorist activity, and of course, the unsolvable problem of what to do with nuclear waste. But tonight, we're going to talk about something different. Tonight's program is about the future that we could have if we get organized and join together to support some of the new technologies that are being developed. Ideas that can change the entire landscape of energy solutions, not only in New York, but around the world. We are on the threshold of a brand new world of possibilities in energy production, storage, and distribution. And that's why we're excited about the program tonight. Everyone here knows something about solar energy, but you may not know how you as an individual can easily be part of the solar energy solution, something the rest of the world knows and is already doing. And tonight you're going to learn more about that. And you may know that we're making progress on renewables, and there have been some great advances in energy technology and battery storage. But before we can get to 100% renewables, we need to get to 80%, and the currently available technologies can get us there. And tonight you're going to learn how that can happen. And finally, you'll be learning about virtual power plants, or VPPs as they're called, a concept that uses online capabilities to connect all of our smart devices into an aggregated but decentralized system that functions as a single flexible power plant. It sounds like the stuff of dreams, but our panelists will explain tonight these technologies are here now and ready to be put to work for New York, helping us to meet our climate goals, preserving New York's forward-looking Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and avoiding the astronomical costs and other immutable issues associated with nuclear power. So with that, let me introduce our first speaker. Cora Stryker is a co-founder of Bright Saver, a nonprofit dedicated to making small, affordable plug-in solar systems accessible to all Americans. She's a leader of social mission-driven organization and thrives on building win-win strategic partnerships to drive measurable impact, investing in growth strategies, and fostering a collaborative, supportive, and inclusive organizational structure. Cora, we're so happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a really exciting night. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to talk about what my nonprofit does, and it is not the whole picture of what we need to do in New York or nationwide, but it is an important one. And the reason it's so important is because it is a way to include everyone in the solar revolution, as you put it, the generating their own power, which is the cheapest energy on the planet and also one of the cleanest. So yeah, we're a nonprofit. I think you did a great job of explaining us. We are very strongly advocating for the Sunny Act. For those of you who don't know, this is a piece of legislation that just passed the New York Senate unanimously last week. Unanimously. Bipartisan, and it's called Solar Up Now New York. And what does it do? It basically takes these small solar arrays that are ubiquitous in Germany and many parts of Europe, Lithuania, and it takes them out of a regulatory gray zone that they're currently in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is the first necessary step toward getting everyone in New York a small generation device like this. By the way, you can get it if you're a renter. if you are a homeowner with a shaded roof, if you live on the third story of a 10-story building. I mean, this is a really flexible modular solution to reducing energy bills and greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. Sunny, though, is the main thing we would love people to work on now. We need to get it through the assembly. And it's a really lovely piece of legislation. It's budget neutral, doesn't cost the state anything. And Con Edison was the first major utility in the nation to support it, actively support it. And I'm happy to say that other utilities nationwide are taking note, and they are thinking about supporting these pieces of legislation that are moving in 34 states as well. And I think, I want to mention that just because as New York goes, so goes the nation. I mean, you all are such a leader in the clean energy movement, and we're just so excited about the Sunny Act, and we hope that it is the first of many very aggressive bills to be signed into law in New York. And I will say, we've already had 4 bills like this signed into law this year. I'll get to that. So what is this? I mean, these are the small generation devices we're talking about. These are the two models that are available today in the United States. One on the left is sort of a classic German balcony setup. This is why it's called balcony solar. If you go to Munich, you'll see these beautiful buildings with, multiple stories. These balcony lightweight panels that can be zip tied to your railing. The one on the right is a larger generation device, and it's appropriate for folks who have more space, a patio, a backyard. But our goal, and what we really need to do to make this ubiquitous, is to enable the market. And once we do that by passing legislation in a handful of states or just one big one like New York, the manufacturers are going to come into this country, and there's going to be a flourishing of technology. We're going to see many more models than just these two. I think it's probably self-evident to this group why this is such a powerful solution. You can have energy more affordable, more energy independence, resilience if you pair it with a battery, and of course, climate. We need to address the climate crisis with the same urgency as we are addressing the affordability crisis, particularly when it comes to energy. Oh, here we go. So this is Germany right now. And I always say this is not AI generated because it would be easy to generate one of these, but this is Germany right now. And what you're seeing is a building owner that decided to install these panels on every single balcony. And it's a real draw for renters, right? Renters can reduce their electricity bills. And I personally just think it's beautiful. I love seeing this. When I see this, I see the future that we all want and are working so hard for. And Germany has seen a really quite spectacular rise in adoption and coincident or consequential drop in price. So if you look at the graph on the left, this is from our white paper. It's at brightsaber.org/white paper. You see that the cost of these systems has declined quite precipitously in Germany over the last decade. And you see that the adoption has surged. So right now, we have about 25 million households. Sorry, 24. What am I? Sorry. We have 4 million households in Germany that have these. What you're looking at on the right is the registered units. So Germany has a registration requirement. That's a little over 1 million, but we believe through our partners on the ground that many people do not register. So we're looking at really widespread adoption in Germany. 1 in 9 Germans have these. Oops. Yeah. Okay, so this is also from our white paper, and this is what we see happening in the United States as soon as we have legislation in a handful of states or New York, one big one. And you'll see a very similar trend. You'll see the payback period falling quite precipitously. Why is that? I'm going to talk about how that simplifies the technology. This legislation will simplify the technology. And, I find this chart really exciting because I love thinking about these 25 million households, or 65 million Americans who will have these in the next 10 years if we do our job right. These are some of the folks from our pilot who participated and have these systems. You've got Terry in the middle. He's a retiree on a fixed income. And he wanted rooftop solar, but he needed a new roof. So that just significantly raised the price tag. Tiffany on the left is a new mom who simply can't afford it. And Sean on the right is a renter and tried to get his landlord to install rooftop solar. The landlord wouldn't do it. So this is how he is cutting his energy bills. And we really are in the middle of a movement here. And I was saying every single time I talk about this, I have to update these numbers. uh, I just heard word that another state this week, tomorrow or the next day, is going to introduce a bill. So it's not even on this slide yet, but we will have by the end of the week 35 states plus DC that have introduced legislation, and we think that is tremendously exciting. People really want this stuff, and it's our job to make sure that everyone can get it. What kicked off this legislative wave? This is our hero, Raymond Ward. He is a legislator in Utah, and he read about these in Germany and thought to himself, okay, why can't I get one? He looked into it, and he discovered that first necessary barrier to overcome, which is passing legislation that clarifies the regulatory reach of utilities. And if you look at this slide, here's why. So this is the really simple system. This is how this works in Europe and now Utah. On the left, you've got your PV modules. They are capturing energy from the sun, converting it to direct current. You've got your inverter that converts that direct current to alternating current, which your household can use. Everything here is exactly the same as rooftop solar, except instead of hardwiring it to your electrical system, you plug it into an outlet. And that is key. That makes it available to renters who can take it with them when they move. And that is the basis of why this is such an exciting revolution in clean energy adoption for our country, all of North America, really. And what you'll see, this is how companies are getting around this before legislation passes. You'll see it's the same on the left, but on the right, you'll see this extra piece of hardware before you get to the grid. And this essentially makes these systems invisible to the utilities. So in every state other than Utah and now Virginia, Maine, and soon Maryland and Colorado, who've passed bills, you need an interconnection agreement with your utility if there's even a possibility one electron could be fed back to the grid. So that's why the only way to ensure it is to install an electrician to install this extra piece of hardware. The cost of the electrician plus the hardware just about doubles the cost. And this is quite silly if you understand how these work. So this is a grid impact report that we worked on Brooks Engineering with. He is an independent expert, Bill Brooks, and he modeled out, okay, what if 40% of the population in every region of the United States had these 1,200 watt systems? What would happen to the grid? And he models quite convincingly that there is no net export at the substation level, even if 40% of the population had these. So this is really a de minimis amount of energy. Most of it will be consumed behind the meter by your refrigerator, your TV, your lights. So this is really a made up concern that is being used to defeat these bills. And another really exciting development is that at December 11th, UL, Underwriters Laboratory, the sort of gold standard of safety certifications, released its criteria for these systems end to end. So before December 11th, you could get systems, but they weren't certified as a whole. They weren't certified as a kit. UL has released that certification. We know from them that companies are already certifying to that new standard, and UL says they'll be available in months, not years. But this isn't the only safety certification we have out there. You'll notice in many of the bills, most of them actually, they don't pick a horse. They say UL or an equivalent testing laboratory. That's super important. We can't have one private company determining what is safe and what is not. Even though they are a very reputable company, they need to be. We need to open the market, and that means letting other safety certifications be acceptable under law. And it's really exciting because this new standard addresses every single hazard that we have heard raised, shock, house fires, structural concerns. It even addresses fire egress. And we think that is the beginning of getting this completely widespread and in a very safe manner. Oops. Okay. Yeah, so I think this is my last slide. So I like to end on this slide because this is what we project in our white paper will happen as this legislative wave spreads through the country. So we don't need very many. In some senses, actually, we wrote this about a year ago. We've already hit this threshold. We've already hit 5 states that have passed legislation. So we expect quite soon the cost of these systems to drop precipitously to just about half of what they are today. Now, it is a little trickier now that we have the new UL certification. This analysis was based on the systems that were in Utah about a year ago. The systems that are going to be certified to the new UL certification as it stands are going to be a little more complex and a little more expensive. And we're working with UL on making the standard a reasonable one that keeps the price low. But I find this graph super inspiring because it just tells us what the power of the people is and what legislation will do. So as we pass legislation in more states, particularly big ones, we're going to see the price just drop really precipitously to German levels. So in Germany right now, you can get these for $300. You can pay them off in 1 to 2 years without subsidies, without tax credits, just based on energy savings. So that's where we're headed. And that's how we're going to get to really ubiquity of these systems where you see them maybe even more frequently than you see rooftop systems.
Laura, that's great. Thank you so much for that presentation. I want to ask, we've had a question from an attendee. Is there any move to eliminate the inverter and charge directly to an EV battery from the solar panel?
Not yet, but the reason this market enablement is so important is those are the sorts of technical interventions that are coming. That's the sort of thing that the manufacturers really want to invest R&D in. But when they look at our nation, they see only a couple states where they're not going to run into this regulatory quagmire. That is changing as we speak. And so if folks on this call want to drive the movement, the best thing you can do is contact your assembly member. We've already passed the Senate. Contact your assembly member and ask them to be a co-sponsor or ask them to vote yes for the SETI Act.
That's great. It's great to be for something instead of always being against something. So thank you for that. That's great. Thanks again, Cora.
Thank you.
Okay, so where are we right now on the long arc of transition between an old energy system built on burning fossil fuels and taking our chances with nuclear power to a new world of energy that's renewable, sustainable, economical, feasible, and safe for everyone? And for that, we're going to turn to Tom Conrad. Tom is a portfolio manager, a financial analyst, a freelance writer specializing in renewable energy and energy efficiency. He serves as the chair on the Marbletown Environmental Conservation Commission, and we are delighted to have him with us this evening. Please welcome Tom Conrad.
Cora gave you an example of how cheap solar is getting. Paybacks of 3 to 4 years. With our current technology, all we have to do is remove some barriers. Batteries have done the same thing, but in New York, we don't have very much yet, so we have to enable it. But solar is cheap, wind is cheap, batteries are cheap, virtual power plants are cheap. Leon will talk about those later. We don't need to look at nuclear, which is not cheap or clean now if we really want to get what we need done. So this is just a general outline. I'll go through sort of more details why those work. So here is where we are versus New York's climate law, the CLCPA. Currently, About 38% of our generation is renewable, mostly hydro, a little wind and solar at the moment. We have 22% from old nuclear plants, which are defined as zero emission by the climate law. Um, and there are targets based around zero emission and around renewable in the law. We have a target for 2030, 70% renewable. That does not count the existing nuclear plants. So we basically have to almost double our renewables by then, actually more than that because demand is growing in the next 4 years. After that, there's a goal in 2040 of getting to 100% zero emission, which does allow for some nuclear, although it doesn't have to be, and there are cleaner options out there which are economical. But we can't get to 100% zero emission unless we first get to 70% renewable. And we certainly won't get there economically. So when you put a lot of renewable solar and wind on the system, the proponents like to call solar and wind intermittent. I like to call it variable because it is predictable how it's intermittent. We know when the sun's going to come up. We know what the weather's going to be. There's a predictable peak of solar in the day. There's predictable wind. And daily cycles have basically been solved because batteries have gotten cheap. There is another seasonal problem that we will run into in 15 or 20 years when we have achieved our renewable goals, that there are some times when it's really dark and not windy in the winter and there isn't a lot of power and you would need something to fill in the gap. We'll talk about what can potentially fill in the gap. But right now, we need to get to 70%. And that thing we're going to use to fill in the gap is really expensive compared to the cheaper things we have now. So we have daily mismatch, which is a solved problem. Leon's going to talk about part of the solution. I'll talk about cheap lithium-ion batteries, which are the other part of the solution. But they are so cheap, it's not a problem. They are already displacing the old fossil fuel gas plants, which used to serve this role, and they're just displacing them on price. The seasonal gap is for tomorrow. Basically, this is I know it's not the best graph, but solar is the yellow. It comes during the day. Wind comes at all sorts of times. Load is generally peaks in the morning and in the evening, and batteries can move that around as we need to. The quick, cheap batteries, they've dropped 93% in price since 2010. Simply because we've been making a lot of them and we're learning as we're doing it. And you can and it deploys really quickly. So we can solve these problems quickly. We can do things quickly. What we have to do is remove the barriers, the legal barriers, the structural barriers that are keeping it from happening. And one of those barriers is the Sunny Act. Another one's the Great Act Leon is talking about. But there's others, and we'll have to keep on doing that because the challenge we need to get to is gigantic. But here are some things for-profit companies are doing in other states where they don't have the same barriers we do. Base Power is a company mostly in Texas, but I think they're going to Ohio now, where they put this box outside your home. It looks like an air conditioner. It is a very large home battery that they mostly use to buy cheap power during the day, sell expensive power during the night. But if the grid goes down, you have 20% of that battery, which is as big as most home batteries people are installing to keep your house online, but you get cheap power. They're doing that with purely profit motive, and it's working. They're growing like crazy in Texas, not in New York, because we have barriers they don't. Carrier is going to start putting batteries in every heat pump or air conditioner they make. This will enable them to, one, keep the load down if you have trouble on your load, but they can also use it for the VPPs you will soon hear about, or other ways to make money by arbitrage. Um, Copper is a induction stove and oven where the battery's integrated in the oven. If you've tried to switch to induction, some people, it's really expensive because they have to do an electrical upgrade. This prevents the electrical upgrade. But it can also be used to firm the grid if we have the rules. And these are things people are installing already with their own dime, and we can use them to make the daily cycles better. Impulse is similar to copper. They just do a stovetop. Their selling point over copper is that it's really the best stove you've ever played with. And that's a picture of my stove. And I will put that stove against anything. I boil my water for my coffee in the morning faster than I can grind the coffee to put in it. Um, it's also very precise. Also has a battery. It could help balance the grid. We don't have the rules to allow it. Redmond Materials is actually a battery recycler who decided they had a bunch of batteries, used batteries from cars, and they're going to build grid storage with these batteries while there's still a little bit left. And then Lunar Energy, I'm almost treading on Leon's they're actually a VPP company, but it's based around a big battery that's sold for basically for home backup, but it also lets people to take advantage and make money from various programs that you'll hear about in the next section in states that allow it. So all this innovation is happening purely because of the market, because these technologies are cheap and people can make money or improve their lives by installing them. And you'll see that from this graph. These numbers are cost of various types of power. Mostly it's pulled from a NYSERDA study used to figure out what we can get. The stuff at the top are solar and onshore wind, virtual power plants, and batteries. These are all really cheap. These are all currently on the grid. This one non-cheap thing on the grid is a gas power plant. If you don't like your electric bill right now, it's because of the gas power plants on the grid. If we get more of this stuff, it'll go down. We need to get more of that stuff. Down below are the things people are talking about to solve that last winter problem that we don't have yet, but we see way out on the horizon. I say we don't worry about that problem way out on the horizon because we need to solve the problem now of high expensive bills and all this fossil we currently have on the grid. But if you want to worry about it, these are the things that might fix it. We're talking about nuclear. Those are various types of nuclear in the red. They're as expensive as gas. And that's, like with SMRs, we don't have them yet. That's what they think they might cost. So in the good case, they're expensive, as well as being dirty. CCS, gas plus capture, that doesn't really count for the CLCPA because even the CLCPA says it's not clean because you can't capture everything. There's something called advanced geothermal. Geothermal power is the type you see where you drill down to the earth and you get down so far that you can get steam, use the steam to drive a turbine. It works in California. It works in a lot of the West where you also have hot springs. Advanced geothermal drills down deeper where you don't already have a hot spring and you can produce power from that. There are companies that are now commercializing that in places where there's heat close to the top of the surface. The US West is mostly that. Company called Vervo, they're doing great things. There, they only need to go to 1 or 2 kilometers to make it work. In New York, they'd have to go to about 8 kilometers. Drilling techniques are being innovated. It might get there. It might be competitive with nuclear. It's not going to be as cheap as solar. Let's wait and see what happens. They are innovating on it. The blue line is one that's not being talked about that actually would lower costs. The blue line is modeling electric transmission as storage. If you ran a giant power line, New York down to South Carolina, well, in the winter, New York is short of power once we get to renewables. In the summer, South Carolina is short of power. Their peak is in the summer, it's air conditioned driven. In the winter, it's a fairly nice climate. They don't have to heat their homes as much. You run that back and forth. You send power south in the summer when we have 16 hours of sunlight on all our solar panels that we're going to be plugging into our homes. Um, and then in the winter, when they don't have to air condition their homes anymore, they can send their surplus power to us. That's probably the cheapest solution. It's transmission. It's hard to build. It needs the states to cooperate as well as the federal. But if you want to work on a long-term solution now, that's the one that would actually lower bills both here and in the Southeast because you're using power that's already there in a better way. So I'm going to get a little bit deeper into these different long duration torque. We've solved, once again, we've solved the short-term problem. It's just a matter of deploying it. The long-term problem, this is a forum series on nuclear. There are other options. Nuclear light water reactors, the traditional form, we've been building them for 50, 70 years. They're expensive. They work. They're not clean. Nuclear small modular reactors, they go on the theory, okay, if you make it smaller, you can build more of them and you can learn by doing. They're not that small. They're big. They're hard to permit. We'll build a few. They might get cheaper. They're not going to get cheap. They'll never get clean. Geothermal, we already talked about why not likely in New York, but people innovating elsewhere may get it to the point where we can start using it. We're not going to innovate, but they're working on it there where it's actually economical already. Let them do that. If they can learn how to drill as deep as we need to, we might use it. CCS, well, again, dirty, dirty, dirty. And it's also expensive. Long duration energy storage. I have a whole nother slide on that. Long duration energy storage is batteries that we can actually use when it's like solar and wind power aren't really doing much for like 2 weeks. So the reason I'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide on that. The Atlantic Wind Connection, the reason I call it the Atlantic Wind Connection is there was a proposal for a high voltage direct current power line up and down the East Coast that was proposed in 2010, mainly for helping to connect offshore wind farms. They'd attach it to several places along the coast and do that. I think you just extend it a little far. You can also connect your longshore wind farms, but you have this big arbitrage between the Northeast and the Southeast, which can lower prices. Basically, every study of improving the connectivity of the US grid lowers prices. This hasn't been studied. I did some back of the envelope, but I know what the answer is going to be before I do it, and we need to study it more because it works. So, more prices. I'm a mathematician. That's what the PhD is. So I like graphs and numbers. There's a chart of most of the technologies for long duration storage. You want to be in the upper left. You want to be cheap, which is left. You want to be at the top, which is efficiency. So when you charge a storage system, you lose some energy. It heats up. When you discharge it, you lose some energy. It heats up. You don't want to lose too much or you're wasting a lot. So where are you not wasting a lot? What types of things? Now, you see this lithium ion in the upper right? It's not looking cheap. I just said it was cheap. The reason lithium ion isn't cheap when you look at it for the purpose of long duration storage is it's cheap when you use it every day. You can basically pay for it by cycling that battery at least 250 times a year. When you're looking at seasonal storage that can actually store 2 weeks of power, well, just think about it. It takes 2 weeks to discharge. It also takes 2 weeks to charge. So if you were constantly cycling it, you might cycle it 10 times. This graph is assuming 8 times a year. So you need something that's ridiculously cheap for the amount of power it stores. And the only way to do that is to build something that has ridiculously cheap materials. So pumped hydro, we do have already in New York. That is storing power by pumping water uphill. The problem with that is you need a big reservoir. There just aren't a lot of places to do that in New York. We can't do it at the volume we need to. And do you really want to cover any more cities with water plus the carbon emissions that you get from creating new dams and having all the vegetation rot? Um, the best contenders are iron air batteries, which is basically rusting iron and unrusting it. That's the chemical process there. The materials are iron and oxygen. They're both ridiculously cheap. They have a chance of getting down to where they'd be economical for this long-term seasonal problem. We're just basically the first commercial one just got signed and they're building it. It works in the lab, but just like the small nuclear reactors want to do, get the price down by building a lot of them. We have to build a lot of them to get it down. The nice thing about batteries and long-term storage is that they're smaller and a lot easier to permit. You're not worried about having a pile of rust next door the way you're worried about having a nuclear reactor next door. So they're just much easier to permit. It doesn't even catch fire. Even, it's iron, it's rust. So gravity storage is kind of cool. Gravity storage ideas have been played around with for a while. Basically, interesting one called Energy Vault. They have a big crane that lifts up giant blocks of cement filled with dirt or rubble and builds a tower out of it, like Jenga. That's how they charge it up. You get a really big solid tower, and then when you want to discharge it, you pick it up with the crane. You run a generator as that giant block runs the cable through your generator, and that's discharging it. So far, only pilot stage. Very cheap materials, theoretically could work. Let's see if it gets perceptive. Flow batteries, a lot of people talk about. The most leading flow battery is vanadium redox flow battery. The problem is vanadium, you haven't even heard of it. If we wanted to use it in big quantity, it would be really expensive because there's not enough. Down in the bottom right, we have basically it's a flow battery. It's hydrogen electrolyzers plus fuel cells. Your storage medium is hydrogen, but you have to make it from electricity and water, and then you turn it back. You discharge by running it through a fuel cell. Problem with that, cheap materials, but it's really inefficient. You have to use 3 or 4 units of electricity in to get one out. And if that electricity has any value, you're losing it. Okay, so there are potential tools for getting to 100%. None of them are right now with us, but first we have to get to 70% renewable. We're at 38. Let's build the cheap stuff. Hopefully these other technologies will get us there. If we don't build the cheap stuff now, we're never getting to 100% anyway. And while we're building the cheap stuff, we'll be bringing the prices down. So that's my presentation. I have lots of sources. If you want to dig into my numbers, you want to learn more about the wind connection, you can get them on the slide, and the slides will be available with the recording if you don't take a picture just now. Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much. That was really great. And we're a little bit over time, but I have to ask you, since the main cost of energy for buildings is heating and cooling, why isn't geothermal for heating and cooling part of our solution here?
Geothermal for heating and cooling is part of our solution. So advanced geothermal is a different thing.
I understand.
But I want to make sure everybody understands.
Yeah.
But advanced geothermal. So geothermal for heating and cooling is part of the solution. That and other building efficiency technologies make the problem less bad.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use geothermal to heat in the winter, when the temperature falls really low, you're using maybe a third as much energy as you would use if you were using air source heat pumps when they start getting inefficient. And then if you do one better and insulate your home properly and seal it properly, you can also probably halve the amount of energy you're using. So those solutions mean that we'll need to have less firm power during those really cold weeks. We still don't have enough, even if we just everyone did geothermal rather than doing air source heat pumps. And geothermal is more expensive, but that's part of people more into the efficiency geothermal direction to make that last problem when we get to it much cheaper.
Yeah. Good. Okay, Tom, thank you so much. We're going to move on. So you've heard a little bit about these. You can take your PowerPoint
Oh,
down,
yeah,
please.
I've taken mine down. Thanks.
So you've heard a little bit about these virtual power plants. They sound fantastic, but how realistic are they? What are the obstacles that stand in the way of us or the utilities or the state really embracing the whole concept of virtual power plants and making them a reality? And to find out, we're going to talk with Leon Porter. Leon serves on the leadership team for Citizens Climate Lobby New York. He leads CCL-NY's Utility Reform Working Group, which recently helped Assemblymember Anna Kellis develop her new bill, which is called the Grid Reliability and Energy Affordability Transition, which stands for GREAT Act. Leon lives in Ithaca, and we're so happy to have him join us tonight. Please welcome Leon Porter.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, let me just share this. Um, yeah, so as Doug said, I'm here on behalf of Citizens Climate Lobby New York, and we're a nonpartisan grassroots organization, all volunteers, and we build relationships with political leaders to support effective climate policies. Okay, now that Tom has explained New York's energy challenges, we're going to talk about a clean, affordable way to help solve some of them. So, as our state works towards a zero emission electricity grid by 2040, we have a dual crisis. Our energy bills are soaring, and our grid is facing serious reliability risks when it tries to handle peak demand. And we urgently need a solution that lowers our electricity bills, cleans the air we breathe, and keeps the lights on. So today I'm going to explain how a technology called virtual power plants combined with the GREAT Act, which Doug mentioned, a new bill, can help us achieve exactly that. Okay, to understand why we need to rewire our grid, we first have to look at one of the biggest problems with our current system, which is our heavy reliance on peaker plants. These are aging, highly polluting fossil fuel power plants that sit idle most of the year and only turn on during times of peak energy demand, like the hottest days of summer. These plants are an urgent environmental injustice. 78% of New York's peaker facilities are over 30 years old and don't have modern pollution controls. 12 of these facilities have over 1 million people living within just a 3-mile radius, and they're often in marginalized neighborhoods. A third of these high polluting plants are in state designated environmental justice communities. And when these plants fire up, they dump massive amounts of lung damaging pollution directly into densely populated neighborhoods like the South Bronx, where they contribute to severely disproportionate rates of asthma, respiratory inflammation, and heart disease. So, how do we shut these dirty peaker plants down while keeping the lights on? Um, One answer lies in building blocks of a modern grid, which are already sitting in some of our homes and garages. And we call them distributed energy resources. So instead of relying on giant centralized power plants that are miles away, we can use decentralized, everyday smart technologies with internet connections. So that can include things like smart thermostats, home battery storage systems, electric vehicles, and controllable heat pump water heaters. And yes, it could also include plug in balcony solar systems if they have two-way internet connections. And here's how we use the devices to solve the problem. So grid emergencies happen during peak demand, which are the few intense hours when millions of air conditioners turn on at the exact same time. Instead of firing up a dirty peaker plant to generate more power to meet that spike, we can use our smart devices to just lower the demand. By sending a signal to pre-cool a house by a single degree or briefly pause a water heater, we can shave the peak of that energy spike without you ever sacrificing your comfort. When you connect thousands of these distributed energy resources together using advanced software, they act as a single unified team known as a virtual power plant, or VPP. Now, an individual smart thermostat or home battery doesn't do much on its own, but when you have 50,000 of them orchestrated to work together, they can provide the exact same amount of power and reliability as a giant dirty peaker plant. And here's the best part: the US Department of Energy found that a VPP does this at a net cost that's 40% to 60% cheaper than building a natural gas plant. And it does it instantly with zero local pollution. So let's look at how this works in practice during 5 p.m. grid emergency in a July heat wave. Okay, in our old brute force grid, demand spikes and the grid operator turns on an aging fossil fuel peaker plant, and ratepayers are charged premium emergency prices for this expensive power, and the local community suffers from a sudden spike in toxic air pollution. So now compare this to an orchestrated VPP on the right. When the same demand spike hits, the VPP software sends a signal to thousands of enrolled homes. Smart thermostats adjust slightly, and electric vehicles charge more slowly. And eventually, as the technology matures, they'll even be able to discharge some battery power back to the grid. And the result is that peak demand is met instantly, the polluting peaker plant stays turned off, and the participating consumers earn a direct financial reward for helping to balance the grid. So that brings us to the financial benefits. Right now, ratepayers spend billions of dollars simply paying fossil fuel companies to keep peaker plants on standby over 95% of the time. VPPs redirect that money straight into the pockets of everyday New Yorkers. If you voluntarily enroll your devices in a VPP, you get paid. An individual household participating with a few smart devices could earn $500 to $1,500 every single year. But even if you don't participate, you still save money, because by using VPPs to avoid building new power plants and expensive local substations and new transmission and everything, studies show that New York could avoid up to 2.9 billion in annual power system costs by 2040. And that will lower utility bills for everyone. So for environmental advocates, the impacts of virtual power plants operate on two scales simultaneously. Fully using VPPs nationwide could avoid 12 million to 28 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emissions every year by 2035. And there was a separate study done by the Brattle Group of New York State alone that found that VPPs could cut 1 million tons of those emissions per year by 2040. And on the local level, VPPs specifically target the exact hours when high polluting peaker plants operate. By flattening peak demand, VPPs reduce the need to fire up those combustion turbines, so they cut emissions of unhealthy smog and particulate matter in our most vulnerable environmental justice communities. So we have the technology today, so why aren't we already doing this everywhere? The problem is that outdated market rules are acting like a padlock and creating distorted incentives for utilities, which basically block everyday people from participating. So that's why we're advocating for the Grid Reliability and Energy Affordability Transition Act, the GREAT Act. This bill officially embraces VPPs and changes the law to give utilities incentives to modernize and expand VPP usage. It cuts red tape and mandates that every major utility create a comprehensive, standardized VPP program. By doing that, it transitions New York's virtual power plants out of the fragmented pilot phase that they've been in for over 10 years and into a statewide flexible grid that will save New Yorkers billions. So, one major concern we've heard is, won't this just benefit wealthy homeowners who can easily afford to buy a $10,000 home battery? Shouldn't clean energy be for everyone? So, the GREAT Act prevents the VPPs from becoming a program only for the wealthy. The law explicitly requires that low to moderate income households and residents in disadvantaged communities receive subsidies to buy the equipment they need to participate. So that actively buys down the initial cost of smart thermostats and batteries right at the point of sale, ensuring that working families and those historically burdened by fossil fuel peaker plants can afford to participate in and profit from the new grid. So we can't achieve New York's ambitious climate mandates by relying on the brute force methods of the past. By unlocking the power of the smart devices we already own, we can lower our energy bills, replace polluting fossil fuels with smart technology, and build a stronger, more resilient grid that keeps the lights on. So I encourage you to consider supporting the GREAT Act to make this clean energy future a reality. And thank you. And I'm happy to take your questions. And I'll say I'm aware that this slideshow is not as technically sophisticated as Tom's or Cora's, but I do have a more technical slideshow which I can share in the chat with anybody who wants more details.
Thank you, Leon. I like your slideshow. It's clean and it's simple and easily understood. You could take it down for the moment. I have to ask
Okay.
you though, the the utilities have got to see this as a challenge to their complete control of, our energy source. Do you get, what's your sense of how the utilities, are they giving this lip service in order to not look like bad people? Are they genuinely behind this?
Well, so right now the utilities are not um, they are not really doing much to support virtual power plants because of their financial incentives. May I just slide one slide from my more technical
Sure. Yeah,
slideshow
yeah,
just
yeah.
to illustrate the issue? Just give me a second here. So, why are utilities not scaling virtual power plants? So basically, utilities operate with a traditional utility regulation is what's called cost of service regulation,
Mhm.
where utilities get reimbursed for their infrastructure expenses for providing energy. And so that is for they get reimbursed for capital expenditures. Um, but the way the model works, they do not get reimbursed. They do not make profits from operating expenses, and software and virtual power plants would be considered operating expenses. So they are, financially biased against um, virtual power plants right now. And the GREAT Act would would give them incentives that would basically make this balance even. So it makes sure that they can also get profits from participating in virtual power plant programs that are just as great as they would get, um, you know, from their
Yeah,
regular capital expenditures.
yeah. Yeah, we have to provide the incentive. So we have a lot of great questions to get to. My friend Valdi asks, if a homeowner already owns solar panels at a remote solar farm and got a tax credit from New York State and the federal government for it, can the homeowner still add a small balcony or ground mount plug-in solar panel system? Cora, I guess that's for you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So different states have different regulations. We're familiar with a few states where you can add extra power without losing your net metering agreement. And I would have to dig into New York actually to see if that's true there. In principle, yeah, absolutely. You can plug one of these into the wall and it will actually, in most states I'm familiar with, you will keep your NEM. So like you will be compensated for that excess electricity at the rate that you negotiated when you locked in your NEM.
Okay, thank you. So a question for all of you. Do you think if we combine these innovations, the VPPs, building the cheap stuff that Tom was talking about, and balcony or backyard solar, can we reach the CLCPA energy goals and emissions without the emission goals without rolling them back? Is that within our grasp?
That plus more innovations.
Okay.
It's we've been dragging our feet. I did, and we only have 4 years.
Hmm.
So if you look at what has to be done, we have to basically do 4 times the amount of solar we've done in the highest last 4 years each year going ahead. Theoretically possible. Solar's really, really, really fast.
Mhm.
Um, but it definitely would require removing a ton of barriers that we have.
Well, right now we're giving tons of money in subsidies to traditional power, to oil and gas companies and so on. If we took that money, poured it into our renewables, could we meet it? Could we get there?
We need to do more than money. Really, the problem right now is not money. These things are cheaper. I mean, like the battery solar, people will pay to install it because they save money on it. These things are cheaper. What we need to do is remove the interconnection barriers to getting it happen. We need to change the framework and get the utilities aligned where they really want it. That it the money is, I mean, the money would help. Money always helps. But
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
but it's not the main problem because these things are cheaper.
The main problem, if I hear you correctly, is political obstacles.
Political and just structural obstacles. So like the way the interconnection process works, um, getting the grid to actually modeling to actually accommodate the VPPs that Leon is talking about, so that the um, extra power that the utilities think is too much can actually fit by getting people to use it. It's actually a really complex problem that can be, you know, it's technically feasible, but the systems are way slow to
Mm.
accommodate. We can, but we can only speed them up.
Leon,
Sorry,
what
I'm
do you,
stealing everyone's.
no, that's okay. That's good. Leon, what do you know about Governor Hochul's attitude towards VPPs? Is she for it? Has Anna Kellis talked to her about it? Do you know?
Well, the bill was only introduced a couple of months ago. Um, and Governor Hochul has introduced a program or a proposal for a program with her executive budget that is meant to incentivize grid flexibility and demand response stuff. But it's, in my opinion, it's sort of just a sort of the outline of an idea for giving. I think she was going to give some rebates to people who already were using smart devices to participate in VPPs, but it was going to be coming out of the general budget. Whereas for the GREAT Act, the GREAT Act can certainly complement what Governor Hochul is trying to do in favor of grid flexibility, but the plan is for the program to be self-funding. That is, the subsidies and stuff are going to be paid for, and the infrastructure is going to be paid for out of the savings
Hmm.
that the program generates.
Are you concerned about cybersecurity with a system like that? I mean, could they turn everybody's, thermostat down to 20 degrees when it's cold outside? I mean,
Why, yes, I have a slide about that. If I can share that again.
okay, one more. You get to share one more slide.
Okay, just one
I
second.
mean, that's a natural concern whenever you got something that's
Yeah,
unmanned.
yeah. I had two special special Q&A slides here. Okay, so that's not the one. You want the next one. Okay, yes. So cybersecurity, yes, it is true that aggregating thousands of Wi-Fi connected devices does expand the grid's attack surface, and there is a cybersecurity risk. The GREAT Act does anticipate this by allowing utilities to recover their costs for VPP cybersecurity measures. So that way they do not have a financial disincentive for taking care of VPP cybersecurity. A lot of the bill, it's really a lot of it is about incentives. Um, but uh, the bill alone is not, we do not get into fine-grained detail about stuff like that as legislation probably shouldn't. We leave it to the PSC to establish appropriate cybersecurity baselines for
Mhm.
VPPs, and those baselines already exist. There are North American standards that already exist that the PSC can and should adopt.
Okay, and we're getting to the end of our program, but I did want to ask whether, and maybe Tom, this is back to you again, whether or not home battery storage is a good substitute for those noisy gas generators that people have for, when the power goes out in a storm. Is that a reasonable thing?
Yeah, and it's getting more reasonable every day. I tends not to be quite as cost effective yet. It's getting really close. However, when we can start using our home batteries as part of a VPP, it will actually be a better option. Um, so yes, the technology's there, it works now. We want to be able to use it to benefit the grid as well, in which case it will be economically better than a gas generator. Is
And and Cora, can that be a solution for people as well? The balcony solar could provide some sort of power for people when the lights go out?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a really important safety feature in the inverter that will shut down the system within milliseconds of a power outage, and that's to protect line workers. That's so that if your panels are still producing electricity, you don't send electricity back to the grid and electrocute hardworking people trying to repair the grid. That said, you can add a battery, and
Yeah, I was
there
going to
are
ask about that.
features that make it possible to disconnect the battery from the inverter when the grid goes down. So again, that's the technical innovation that needs to flourish, but we need to remove these regulatory barriers to clear the way.
Great. You guys were terrific. This has been a really terrific panel. I appreciate your knowledge and your willingness to share it with us very much. I did want to remind our audience, as many of you are aware, a bill has been introduced in the New York State Legislature to enact a moratorium on the use of any taxpayer funds to support any advancement of nuclear power in New York. The bill kind of has two purposes. One is to avoid the kind of incredibly expensive mistakes that government officials and utility companies have made in the past regarding nuclear power, and the other is to allow a bit more time for these new technologies to find their feet and to really to move ahead. I think we've heard some really exciting ideas tonight, and one of the takeaways that I'm getting is we just need more time for these things to really become reality. And so that would be another side benefit of at the moment not allowing New York State taxpayer money to be poured into nuclear. I encourage you to visit the website nynuclearmoratorium.org, and there you'll find all the information you would ever want about this issue. And you can join us if you feel so inclined in working in Albany to try to move this forward. We have a number of Senate sponsors already signed on, and the number of co-sponsors is growing daily. So we need all your energy to help us get there. That's going to do it for our program tonight. Special thanks to our presenters, really, Cora, Tom, Leon. You guys were great. We really, really appreciate it. Thank all of you for who attended tonight. We appreciate it. You will get a notice when the video is available. And That's it. Have a good rest of the night, and thank you for attending.